The Basilikon Astra, the Mechanicum Fleet. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and war gear of the Warhammer 40k setting. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. If you wish to see the channel flourish, then like and subscribe. But also consider joining our Patreon or throwing a one-off tip in the form of a super thanks if I have indeed earned your bounty. And today, we shall be discussing one of the most important formations in the entirety of the Imperium. We have covered the Navis Imperialis before, and will continue to do so, for it is such a huge topic. But today, we discuss one of the other forms of fleets, the Basilikon Astra, the warships of the Mechanicum Fleet. As usual, the format of this video will be simple, a tale to set the mood, then the cold hard lore of the topic. So, let us begin. From the Bald Library, nobody expects the Basilikon Astra. After a few defeats that could have been far worse had he not ordered withdrawals and holding actions, Rear Admiral Yi Sun Sin had fought a valiant campaign. The Admiral had learnt their ways swiftly. He'd harried the Xenos, had brought them to battle where he'd wanted, when he'd wanted, and punished them again and again. But they were too many, and they were too advanced. They'd come out of nowhere, striking from beyond the Imperium with startling speed. They appeared, slew everything, and were gone again, like ghosts. But what they left in their wake was all too real. When it started, Sector Command had thought it was just another raiding force, a lesser race that would soon run out of steam. But Admiral Sun Sin had been right when he had rejected this lazy estimation of the reports. Taking direct command of the subsector, he mobilized far back from the war front, had drawn together flotillas and strike groups that seemed almost an overreaction in the initial years. But the Admiral's gut was right. These raids were actually probes. Over decades, the frequency of events went down, but their targets escalated in size and importance. The Xenos had far more rhyme and reason when you looked at it from a logistic rather than strategic position. They were eroding capacity to produce and maintain the materials of war. Rejuved at least once during this lengthy deployment, Admiral Sun Sin refused promotion on a score of occasions. He knew somehow that the war was not nearly even truly begun. The fleets he swapped and bargained for were not of the norm. Faster, less directed energy weapons, almost simpler tech. Kinetic. But destructive, all right, like any Imperial ship. Just antiquated was the best way of describing it. And he had faced this foe multiple times. And when you harbored all information, it was startling when added to the overview. These Xenos were advanced all right, able to appear and disappear at will, and they could jump somehow within system, but not into the warp. They could speed up rapidly to either engage or withdraw. So many battles had been over before the Imperium had even known it was under attack. They moved in that quickly. Their weapons carved through his ships. They could board at will via mass teleportarums of some form and extracted their men just as swiftly. It was as if they just phased out of existence. But they could be harmed. Focused down individually, both their ranks of foot and terrible butchers on three pincers, the same was true of their ships also. If you could punish them, They could not replace and repair fast enough to survive, but Admiral Sun Sin had lost 3 ships at least for each he had taken from the Xenos. At least, at start. This was all before Orpheus, before the true scope of the new Xenos threat was known. Admiral Sun Sin saw what they were doing. This was no random raiding. It was preparation, softening them up on a sector level. And the real assault came without warning. As happened in Orpheus, they struck like a tsunami, washing over a score of worlds before the first reports had even come in. But the hardest defended places were avoided. Sun Sin learnt by looking deeper and deeper into his own arrangements and strengths, then learnt to predict some of their targets. And the Xenos were repulsed more than a dozen times, punished compared to earlier engagements at least. But they were too numerous, their weapons devastating, and they were relentless. Soon they would be dubbed the Soulless, the Silver Horde. The Admiral fought for every system. His fleet ground down in the effort. He'd been forced to transfer his flag no less than 3 times. He was down to a battle cruiser now. Anything larger having been lost or irreparably damaged. With what forces remained to him, Admiral Sun Sin offered the enemy a decisive engagement. But when the Xenos appeared in force, his fleet jumped away. Yet, it was obvious what line they were taking. Only 1 star of importance in that direction in the entire region, but one the Xenos had never witnessed, never gotten close to, the Xenarix system. The Imperial fleet arrived scant hours before the Xenos pursuers, but the trap had been set, and the Xenos sprung it. Appearing deep in system, the scythe structures of the enemy came on quickly, but the Imperials and their allies were ready. Not in lines, nor columns. The Imperial fleet was arrayed so that each ship was at different elevations, so that any could fire entire broadsides without consideration of blue-on-blue collateral mishaps. The other fleet in system was equally displaced, yet far larger. It was the Basilikon Astra, with multiple battleships and Mechanicum cruisers alongside the usual lunar classes. But there in its midst, in the middle, was a beast larger than any battleship the Admiral had ever seen. It was like a city in space, a clearly human ship, but colossal. As wide as a cruiser, as long as a landmass, vast, and armed to match. An Arx Mechanicum. As enemies came on, Nova cannons fired from the Mechanicum Fleet, and most especially this beast of a ship in its middle. But the fire of the Nova cannons was not widely dispersed, instead clustered to strike in waves. Some clusters of greater impact, but all at small areas of the main bulk of the enemy. The enemy could not teleport. They were fast, but speeding into the cannons would not help them now. When the Nova cannon shots turned into suns again and again, the Xenos ships buckled, then burst. But this was only some of them. They were headed straight towards the Mechanicum Fleet now. Admiral Sun Sin began to maneuver to flank and encircle them. The target of the Arx Mechanicum at their center, a challenge given, and the Xenos accepted. The huge Xenos ships fired and struck down the outer echelon frigate escorts. The Mechanicum retorted, hurling their forward lance arrays at the foe, always coordinated to tear one ship apart for each squadron in the fleet. Then they turned and gave a broadside as the Xenos ships came within range, as the Navis Imperialis ships gave an oblique attack and matched the Mechanicum. The Xenos were caught between that and a wave of torpedoes, followed by waves of fighters and bombers that filled the void. The Arx Mechanicum, the Axis Mundi, obliterated the flagship of the Xenos, but took hits from its carcass. scrapped Xenos metal hitting it like a meteor shower. Yet she survived and carried on firing. Admiral Sun Sin brought his fleet behind the Xenos, cutting off any attempt at retreat, and punished them for every world man or woman or child they'd ever slain. And scores of Xenos ships were torn to shreds under the continuous pounding. Within a mere few hours, it was over. Swarms of support ships now flooded from the far side of the planet, a forge world, and within days they were tending the crippled vessels and resupplying those largely intact. The Axis Mundi and her fleet, and that of Admiral Sun Sin's, had won a great victory. It proved to be a bloody nose that slowed the onslaught of the Xenos, but things would never be the same again. The Necrons had awoken. The Basilikon Astra, the Adeptus Mechanicus fleet. In its essence, it seems quite simple, for reasons we shall explore. Yet there is so much hidden amongst the ships of the priesthood of Mars, and, sadly, ironically, it can be postulated that many of the fundamental secrets are held even from those who wield these swords of the stars. The Navis Imperialis is the Imperial Navy, and, as I have previously elucidated, this is entirely constructed and maintained by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Forge worlds are the wellsprings of the majority of the armament of the Imperium, from the bane blades of the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, all the way to the ships of the line, the Gothic horrors that are the Imperial fleet's ships. But not all of the vessels of Mars are extant in the fleets of the Navis Imperialis. Some ship designs they retain just for themselves. Now most are not that impressive compared to their navy counterparts, the Mechanicum cruiser not being truly quantitatively superior to the lunar class seen so ubiquitously across the void. Yet in one instance, there is no equivalent to the monster of the Mechanicum, the Arx Mechanicus. As I attempted to show in my wee tale, the Mechanicum have a beast of a ship called an Arx Mechanicus. The only comparable ship class in the Imperial Navy would possibly be the Gloriana-class vessels of the Great Crusade, or perhaps even the legendary Abyss-class battleships. The Arx Mechanicum is vast, powerful, and almost entirely self-sufficient. They're the focal point of an explorator fleet, led by an Archmagos Explorator or Archmagos Veneratus. For the Mechanicum has been sending out fleets for far longer than the Imperium of mankind. Mars was unified much earlier than Terra, and during short lulls in the warp storms that defined the Age of Strife, often called Old Night, the tech priests of Mars would send out armadas to colonize the galaxy. These lulls would be brief, so the fleets required to be able to make long journeys and then set up new forge worlds when they reached their target destinations. And the Mechanicum were ever as martial as the Imperium later became, and the fleets were, of course, more than ably equipped to defend themselves and wage war. The galaxy was, and is, an unwelcoming place, and the ability to start a colony forge or night world would be pointless if it was vulnerable to the predations of Xenos or other threats so prolific in the Milky Way galaxy before the scourge that was the Great Crusade. Even now, it can be a dark and terrible place, even after countless hundreds of Xenos or alien races were extinguished by that terrible war of conquest, the Great Crusade. So the Mechanicum are more than able to create fleets populated by the usual classes of battleships, like the Emperor, Retribution, and Oberon classes. They have Lunar, Tyrant, and Gothic class ships of cruisers, and every form of escort and light cruiser also. The Nova, Sword, Gladius, and Firestorm, Falchion, Cobra, or Hunter class ships, all are seen within the Basilikon Astra. Yet it is in their support ships that they truly shine. They have many forms of vessel that can deliver night households or Titan legios to the surface of a world, in the form of the Conquisitus, Invasion Lander, Drop Vault, or even Drop Keeps. And they're fun, we should get to them one day. They have ships that will repair their fleet while out amongst the void, like the Forged Tender, or ones that harvest the plasma from stars and process it to distribute to the entire formation, or the Extractor Scow that harvest elements from gas giants. They maintain and utilize the Megaeron forged vessels and Goliath-class factory ships that churn out weapons and materials. The Mechanicum Fleet can head in one direction, and as long as they stop off in systems to replenish their resources, they need never ever return to their point of origin or any forge world for supply or support. But it is in the Arx Mechanicum that their true potence resides. Many are considered to be products of the dark age of technology, some being reclaimed from space hulks, some being produced before the fall from grace. Yet some, too, are made by the tech priests, but this is a colossal undertaking. It is these ships that are the main command and control of the fleets, and some say that they have every bit as much technology and production capacity as a small forge world unto themselves. Thus, if this one ship alone can survive any encounter, given time and resources, they can replace any ship lost in their campaign. They can rebuild entire fleets. Vast and every bit as potent in combat as they are in production, the Arx Mechanicum has a dreaded Nova cannon as one of its main armaments. With banks of lance and weapon batteries, even a battleship will be torn asunder by their broadsides, if indeed any foe can get past their Nova cannon shots, which is no easy task, I can tell you. Now there is one in particular, the Esperanza, which I may cover at another point. This is only a brief nibble for the midweek after all, yet the most important element of some of these ancient juggernauts of war is that they may well have a hidden database within them. The tech priests of Mars are by far and away the most technologically advanced subset within the Imperium, and even now can challenge many of the greater Xenos races for technological know-how. Yet, some suspect that even they are blind to the most esoteric and advanced systems within their own vessels. They simply do not have the knowledge or wit to see. For some say that within more than a few of the Arx Mechanicum are the very thing that the priesthood searched the entire galaxy for. The legendary STC, or Standard Template Constructs. They were the pinnacle of human technological wonders, a database of every last piece of technology that humanity had at its apex. Even the Archdominus Belisarius Call, who does indeed own an Arx Mechanicum for his own ventures within the prior nexuses, has not discerned this system of schematics. So, is this wishful thinking or pure conjecture? Well, one day we shall discuss the aforementioned Esperanza, the greatest of all Arx Mechanicum, and we shall see what we shall see. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Like and subscribe, tip, if I have earned your bounty, and do check out the video description for other entertainment opportunities, and potentially codes to make savings on games. But most importantly of all, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.